I have always been careful with my hands, not in the dramatic way people imagine when they hear that sentence. I don't flinch when someone brushes past me in a crowd, and I don't recoil from a polite handshake. But I have learned, slowly, deliberately, that touch is a language that once spoken cannot be taken back. Words can be clarified. Silences can be forgiven. Touch, once given, leaves a record the body remembers, long after the mind tries to edit it. That is why I work with fragile things. Old paper, fading ink, documents whose edges crumble if you breathe too close. My job is to preserve them, not to own them. I wear gloves, move slowly, keep distance even when closeness would be faster. People think it's about caution. It isn't. It's about respect for what cannot be replaced once damaged. The building where I work understands this philosophy. It is old, half restored, full of rooms that exist more in shadow than light. The corridors curve unexpectedly, lamps hum instead of shine. Some doors never quite close. Others resist opening, as if deciding whether you're worth the effort. That was where I first noticed Arjun. Not when he spoke. Not when he entered the room. I noticed him the way you notice a change in temperature. Indirectly, through effect rather than presence. The light shifted differently when he was there. Softer, somehow. Less demanding. He was hired to test lighting for the upper floors, places the public never sees. Trial runs, temporary installations, adjustments that would later be replaced by something permanent. We were both, in a way, working with impermanence. At first we did not speak. We occupied the same spaces at different times. I would arrive early, leaving notes on clipboards about humidity levels or paper decay. He would come later, rearranging lamps, adjusting angles. Sometimes I would return to a room and notice the shadows had changed, as if someone had moved the walls while I was gone. I knew his name before I knew his voice. It was written on a schedule pinned crookedly near the stairwell. Arjun Val. Block letters. Practical handwriting. No unnecessary curves. The first time we shared a room, we did so by accident. I was cataloguing a set of letters on a long table near the windows. Tall windows that let in light but not warmth, when the door opened quietly behind me. I didn't turn. People come and go. Footsteps pause. Objects shift. But then the light changed. Not brighter. Warmer. Like someone had tilted the afternoon slightly in my direction. I didn't realize anyone was in here, he said. His voice was even, unhurried, not apologetic, but considerate. I turned then, carefully, as if sudden movement might disrupt the air between us. He stood several feet away, far enough to be respectful, close enough to be intentional. A lamp rested on the floor beside him, unplugged, its cord coiled neatly in his hand. "It's fine," I said. "I'll be another 20 minutes. He nodded, as if storing that information rather than reacting to it. "I can wait." "Ah, you don't have to. I know." That was the first thing I learned about him. He didn't confuse choice with obligation. He leaned against the wall, not looking at me, not pretending not to, just existing in the room without claiming it. I returned to my work. Paper, ink, the steady rhythm of attention. Minutes passed, maybe more. I became aware of him the way you become aware of your own breathing. Present but not distracting. He did not move closer. He did not fill the silence. The lamp remained unplugged. Eventually I finished earlier than expected. "You can go ahead," I said, stepping back from the table. He looked at the documents, then at my hands, still gloved. "Are you done with the light near the window?" "Yes." I'll start there, then. We coordinated without choreography. I moved left, he moved right. At one point, we both reached for the same switch on the wall. We stopped. It was a small thing, a few inches of space. But I felt it immediately. The pause, the question embedded in it. He withdrew his hand first. Not quickly, not dramatically. Just enough. You go ahead, he said. I did. Our fingers did not touch. The absence of contact lingered longer than contact ever would have. That night, as I locked up the storage room and turned off the last lamp, I realized something unsettled me. Not his presence. Not his restraint. The fact that I had noticed it at all. I had noticed how carefully he held the cord, how he waited for permission even when none was required, how he did not fill space simply because it was available. I went home thinking about hands, mine, gloved and ungloved, his, hovering, deliberate. Nothing had happened. That was the point. And yet, something had shifted, quietly, almost politely, making room for a future moment I did not yet understand.
From which city in the world are you watching this story today? If stories like this, about the unseen, the classified, and the impossible, fascinate you, subscribe. There are more truths hidden between the clouds than we'll ever be clear to see.
I did not decide to pay attention to Arjun. Attention arrived on its own, settling into my days the way dust does, quietly, inevitably, without asking permission. I learned the rhythm of his presence not by watching him, but by anticipating where the light would feel different. He worked late afternoons most days. I worked early mornings and stretched into evening when deadlines pressed. Somewhere in that overlap, we began to share time without sharing intention. There were rules in the building, spoken and unspoken. Don't rearrange furniture without logging it. Don't touch archived material without gloves. Don't assume a room is empty just because it's quiet. We followed those rules well. Perhaps too well. Our interactions were practical at first. Do you need this outlet? I'll be done in 5. I can adjust after you leave. Each sentence left space at the end, as if neither of us wanted to close it completely. Once, I carried a box of restored folders from the drying room towards storage. The box was heavier than I expected. Not enough to ask for help, but enough that my grip tightened, my arms adjusted their balance. He appeared at the corner before I saw him fully, stepping aside instinctively to give me room. Careful, he said, not as a warning, but an acknowledgement. I'm fine. I know. He didn't offer to take the box. I noticed that people usually did. They reached first, asked later. He only slowed his pace to match mine, walking beside me without touching the load. Halfway down the corridor, my hand slipped. The box tilted, not dramatically, just enough to shift the weight. I corrected it quickly, but in that brief moment of imbalance his hand moved, not to the box, to the air, near it. Ready, but not committed, I steadied myself. The folders remained intact. His hand returned to his side. Thank you, I said, though he hadn't touched anything. He nodded, accepting gratitude for an act he had chosen not to complete. That was when I began to understand him, not as a man, but as a presence. He was attentive without being invasive, available without being demanding. It was disarming. Days passed like this. Parallel movements, shared corridors, separate tasks. Sometimes, when I entered a room, the lamps were already adjusted in a way that made my work easier, less glare on ink. fewer shadows on edges. I told myself it was coincidence. Then it happened again, and again. Once, I left a note near a window. Light too harsh for vellum. Please reduce after 4 p.m. The next day, the light was perfect, not dimmer, just angled differently, as if someone had considered not only the material, but the way I leaned over the table when I read. I didn't thank him. He didn't ask. There was a moment, small, almost forgettable, that changed the texture of my awareness. We were both in the stairwell, descending from different floors. The stairwell was narrow, its walls close enough to trap sound. When we met on the landing, there was no way to pass without proximity. "I'll go first," he said. "No, it's fine," I replied at the same time. We stopped. It happened again. That pause, that shared breath of uncertainty. This time, I noticed my body's response before my mind named it. The slight tightening in my chest. The awareness of my hands at my sides. "Go," he said gently. I stepped past him. The space between us was inches. I could smell clean fabric, something faintly woody beneath it. He leaned back just enough that our shoulders didn't brush. As I passed, I became acutely aware of how intentional that avoidance was. He could have stood still. He could have let contact happen accidentally. He chose not to. When I reached the next landing, I stopped without knowing why. I turned. He was still there, waiting until I was clear before continuing down. Our eyes met briefly. No smile, no apology, just acknowledgement. That night, at home, I removed my gloves and washed my hands longer than necessary. I thought about the box. The stairwell, the way near touch felt heavier than touch itself. I realized something unsettling. I trusted him. Not because he had proven anything dramatic, but because he had consistently proven what he would not do. Trust, I was learning, did not arrive with grand gestures. It arrived with restraint, repeated until it became reliable. And in that realization, another question formed. Quiet but persistent. What would it feel like if he didn't pull away? The power went out on a Tuesday. Not dramatically. No storm, no thunder, no sense of interruption that felt earned. Just a quiet failure somewhere inside the building's old wiring. A sigh, rather than a snap. The lamps dimmed once, as if reconsidering, and then everything softened into shadow. I noticed it first in the reading room. The letters beneath my hands lost their clarity, ink dissolving into suggestion. I waited a few seconds, expecting the backup system to engage. It didn't. I removed my gloves carefully, folding them instead of dropping them on the table. Even in darkness, habits matter. Footsteps approached. Measured. Familiar. "Looks like a full outage," Arjun said from the doorway. His voice sounded closer in the dark, less filtered by space. "Any idea how long?" "Hard to say. The building doesn't like being rushed." I smiled despite myself. "Neither do I." He stepped in, stopping where the light used to be strongest. In the dimness, distance became harder to judge. Shadows erased edges. I could sense him without seeing him clearly, the way you sense a wall when your eyes are closed. "I can bring a portable lamp," he offered. "Would that help? For the documents?" "Probably not." A pause. "For moving around, maybe?" I considered the letters on the table. Fragile. Unforgiving. I should put these away. "I'll stay," he said immediately. Not hovering, not assuming, just present. I nodded. "All right." We worked in silence. I slid folders back into their cases by memory, hands slower than usual. He stood nearby, not close enough to interfere, close enough to be useful if something went wrong. Our coordination didn't require discussion, it felt. Practice though we had never practiced it. When I finished, the room felt suddenly too large, too empty of purpose. There's light in the stairwell, he said. Emergency fixtures. Lead the way. He did, but slowly, matching my pace, announcing each turn without making it feel like instruction. Step down here. Handrail on the left. At one point the stairs narrowed further, the darkness thickened, swallowing detail. I hesitated. He stopped too. I can go ahead, he said. No, I replied, surprised by my own certainty. Just stay where you are. Okay. The space between us felt charged, though nothing touched. My hand hovered near the railing. His was somewhere near his side. I was suddenly aware of how vulnerable the dark made everything. Not dangerous, just honest. Without light, there was no performance. No accidental intimacy to hide behind. I'm not good in the dark, I admitted. The words escaped before I could evaluate them. I won't move unless you ask me to, he said. That was the moment consent stopped being abstract. We stood there longer than necessary, breathing, listening to the buildings settle around us. Somewhere far away, a door closed. The emergency light flickered, uncertain but persistent. Can you see me? I asked. Enough, he said. Can you see me? Not really. Does that bother you? I thought about it. About how much of my life was built around visibility, being seen correctly, being understood on the right terms. No, I said finally. It doesn't. Another pause. This one heavier. If you want, he said carefully, I can stand closer. Not touching, just nearer. I weighed the offer, the clarity of it. No assumptions. No momentum. Yes, I said. He moved. I felt it rather than saw it, the shift in air, the redistribution of warmth. He stopped before the space collapsed. The closeness was deliberate, negotiated. My heart slowed instead of racing. That surprised me. Is this okay? He asked. Yes. Silence returned, altered. I became acutely aware of my hands. Empty, useless, hanging at my sides as if waiting for instruction. I curled my fingers slightly, grounding myself. He did nothing. That, too, mattered. Eventually, the lights came back on, not all at once, but in reluctant stages. A hum, a flicker. The room reassembled itself. Edges returned. Distance reasserted its claims. We stepped apart naturally, as if pulled by invisible strings. No disappointment, no relief, just acknowledgement of transition. Looks like we're back, he said. We walked the rest of the way without incident. At the exit, we paused again. Another unspoken question. Thank you, I said. This time, it wasn't for restraint. It was for care. He met my eyes. Any time. After he left, I remained in the doorway longer than necessary. The dark had not given me what I thought I wanted. It had given me something quieter. The knowledge that if I reached out, truly reached, he would not mistake the gesture. There was a moment that week when I almost touched him. It didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive with warning or consequence. It slipped in quietly, disguised as practicality, and only revealed its weight afterward, when it was already gone. It happened in the West Wing, a room rarely used except for overflow storage. The ceiling was high, the windows narrow, and the light, when it worked, fell in long vertical strips that made everything feel taller than it was. I had been asked to check a cabinet of unprocessed materials stored there years ago, forgotten until someone remembered forgetting them. Arjun was already there when I arrived, not waiting, working. A temporary lamp stood near the cabinet, its glow angled carefully away from the shelves and towards the floor. He looked up when he heard me, straightened, and stepped back instinctively, creating space before I asked for it. I wasn't sure how sensitive the contents were, he said, so I kept the light low. Thank you, I replied, and meant it in the specific way reserved for people who understand before being told. We stood side by side, though not close. The cabinet doors were heavy, resistant with age. He opened one, slowly, testing its movement before committing. Inside were bundles of documents tied with thinning twine, their edges uneven, time-worn. I'll handle them, I said. Of course. He stepped back again, hands visible, unoccupied. I appreciated that more than I could articulate. There is something grounding about knowing exactly where someone's hands are. As I leaned in to examine the first bundle, the lamp shifted, not because he touched it, because the cord tugged slightly as he adjusted his footing. The light wavered, briefly throwing shadow across the shelf. I reacted without thinking, lifting my hand to steady the lamp's head. At the same moment, he did the same. Our hands stopped, inches apart. Time slowed in that infuriating, unmistakable way that tells you something irreversible is hovering nearby. I could see the faint lines on his knuckles, the subtle tension in his fingers as he held still. I was aware of my own hand, uncovered, unprotected, closer to another person's skin than it had been in longer than I cared to admit. Neither of us moved. He began. I've got it, I said, too quickly. I adjusted the lamp alone. The light stabilized. The moment passed. But it did not disappear. The air felt altered, as if it had been disturbed and had not yet settled back into place. I withdrew my hand slowly, deliberately, aware of how visible the choice was. Sorry, he said quietly. For what? He hesitated. For assuming. You didn't, I replied, and realized as I said it that it was true. We continued working, but something had shifted. The ease remained, but beneath it ran a new awareness. Sharp, precise. The knowledge that proximity now carried memory. Later, we sat on opposite sides of the room, taking notes. The silence was no longer neutral. It held shape. I almost touched you, I said, without looking up. He didn't pretend not to hear. I know. I didn't plan to. I didn't think you did. That mattered. That he understood the difference. Does it bother you? He asked. I considered the question carefully. No, I said. It startled me. He nodded. That makes sense. I glanced at him then. His posture was relaxed, but attentive, as if he were braced for nothing more than honesty. I felt an unexpected pull toward that steadiness. I don't touch people easily, I added. I've noticed, he said, not accusing, observational. And yet, I continued, surprising myself, I keep noticing when you don't. A faint smile crossed his face. Not amusement, but something quieter. Recognition. I don't want to get it wrong, he said. The words settled between us, heavy with implication. Getting it wrong wasn't about manners. It was about crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Neither of us spoke after that. When the work was done, we packed up in practiced silence. At the door, I paused, hand on the frame, reluctant to leave the charged stillness of the room behind. Arjun, I said. Yes, if... I stopped, rethought, tried again. If I do reach out someday, I need you to let me. His answer came without hesitation. I will. And not assume what it means. I won't. That too felt like a promise. I walked away with my hands empty and my chest tight, aware that something fragile had been preserved, not by avoidance, but by intention. The almost touch replayed in my mind that night, not as regret, but as rehearsal. My body remembering a boundary it had not crossed, and wondering what it would feel like when it finally did. There are moments when restraint stops feeling like distance and starts feeling like exposure. That was the week it happened. Not all at once, not in confession or collapse, but in fragments. Small disclosures that accumulated until the space between us felt less like a boundary and more like a threshold. It began with rain. The building responded to weather the way a body responds to memory, subtly, unevenly. The humidity rose. Doors swelled and resisted. The air carried a metallic scent that settled into the corridors. I stayed late that evening, recalibrating storage conditions, moving between rooms with a clipboard tucked under my arm. Arjun was there too, adjusting a temporary installation near the upper archive. The rain had dimmed the daylight, turning everything inward. "You'll want to keep the cabinets closed tonight," I said when I found him. "The paper absorbs moisture faster when the air's like this." "I can redirect airflow," he replied. "It might help, thank you." We worked in parallel, as we often did, but something about the weather stripped away the neutrality of routine. The sound of rain against glass made the silence less empty, more intimate, like a shared shelter. At some point we ended up sitting on opposite sides of a long table. Not working, just existing in the same pause. "You never talk about your life outside this place," he said gently, not accusatory, curious. "I don't talk about it much at all," I replied. "Is that by choice?" I considered that. It became one. He nodded, as if that answer carried weight beyond its words. After a moment I added, "Touch was complicated growing up." He didn't lean in, didn't ask why. He waited. "I learned early that it wasn't neutral," I continued, "that it always meant something else. Obligation, expectation, ownership." He absorbed that quietly. No interruption, no soft noises of sympathy, just attention. "So, I learned to keep it precise," I said. "Limited. That explains your work," he said, almost to himself. "Yes," I smiled faintly. "It does." He looked at his hands then, open, resting on the table. "For what it's worth," he said, "I don't think touch should ever be assumed." I met his gaze. "That's why I trust you." The word settled between us, undeniable now that it had been spoken. Outside, the rain intensified. Inside, something eased. Later, as we packed up, I noticed how tired he looked. Not exhausted, just worn in a way that suggested long patience. "You don't rush things," I said. "I used to," he admitted. "It didn't end well." That was all he offered, and it was enough. We stood near the exit again, rain muting the world beyond the glass. For once, neither of us seemed in a hurry to leave. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes. If I ever misread you, I want you to tell me. Directly. I didn't hesitate. I will. And if I wait too long." I considered that too. "Then I'll reach out." The honesty of it surprised us both. That night, at home, I sat on the edge of my bed and held my own hand. Fingers laced, pressure measured. I tried to imagine another set of fingers there, steady, asking nothing. It didn't frighten me. It felt possible. The building closed early, the night the storm arrived properly. Not rain this time, but wind, persistent, insistent, the kind that tests old structures the way questions test carefully built answers. Administration sent a message just before dusk advising staff to finish up and leave before conditions worsened. I read it twice, then once more, as if repetition might change the meaning. I should have gone. Instead, I stayed to secure the upper archive. There were protocols for storms, sealing vents, checking window latches, powering down sensitive equipment. I told myself I was being responsible. I told myself I wasn't waiting. By the time I finished, the corridors were empty in the way only emptied workplaces are. Too quiet, stripped of expectation. The lights were dimmed to their lowest setting, emergency ready. The building felt narrower, as if drawing inward. That was when I heard footsteps again. "You didn't leave," Arjun said, appearing at the far end of the corridor. "Neither did you." He held up a small portable lamp, the same one from the outage weeks ago. "I wanted to make sure the upper floors were stable." So did I. We stood there, the distance between us no longer habitual, but chosen. "The storm's picking up," he said. "We should probably head down together." Together. The word landed softly, deliberately. We moved through the corridors side by side, not touching, but closer than before. Close enough that our arms swung within the same airspace. Close enough that I could sense his pace adjusting to mine without thought. Halfway down the west stairwell, the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then settled into emergency mode. Dim. Amber. Barely enough to define shape. I stopped. "It's fine," he said immediately, and then corrected himself. "I mean, tell me what you need." I appreciated that he caught it, that even reassurance could be negotiated. "I just need a second," I replied. The wind howled against the building, rattling something deep in its frame. The sound travelled through the stairwell, magnified, intimate. I wrapped my arms around myself without realizing it. "I can stand closer," he offered. Still no touching. "Yes," I said. The word came easier than before. He stepped into my space carefully, like someone approaching a skittish animal. He stopped before our bodies aligned, leaving room for retreat. I could see him now, his outline, the concentration in his stillness. The darkness felt different this time, less uncertain, more intentional. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "Yes." "Do you trust yourself?" That question took longer. "I think," I said slowly, "I'm learning to." Another gust hit the building. The lights dimmed further, then steadied. The stairwell felt suspended, as if the world beyond it had temporarily ceased to matter. My hand loosened from my arm, hung at my side, empty. I became acutely aware of that emptiness. "Ira," he said quietly. Saying my name like that, without urgency, without claim, made something shift. "I know," I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure what I was answering. We stood like that for a long time, not frozen, settled. The silence between us felt structured, almost architectural, built carefully from choice. My fingers tingled, not from cold, from consideration. This was the moment I had rehearsed without admitting it, the moment that had hovered behind every almost touch, every paused breath. But now that it was here, it did not demand. It waited. I moved first, not toward him, toward myself. I straightened my shoulders, slowed my breathing. I let the noise of the storm fade into background. Then I lifted my hand, not quickly, not hesitantly either, with the precision I reserved for fragile things. I stopped halfway between us. He didn't move. His stillness was not restraint now. It was permission. "Tell me if I should stop," I said. "I will," he answered. I closed the distance by inches. My hand hovered near his, close enough to feel warmth, not close enough to feel skin. The anticipation was almost unbearable, not because of desire, but because of meaning. This would change something. Once done, it could not be undone. I thought of my work, of paper that could never be returned to its original state once touched improperly, of how preservation sometimes meant knowing when to intervene and when to let something become what it would. My fingers brushed his, barely, a contact so light it could have been imagined. But it wasn't. My body knew the difference immediately. A quiet recognition, deep and steady. I didn't pull away. Neither did he. We stood there, hands not yet joined. Contact minimal but undeniable. The storm continued around us, irrelevant now. "How does that feel?" he asked, voice low. "Like I chose it," I said. "That's enough!" I let my fingers curl. Not fully. Not yet. Just enough to rest against his hand, the shape of it aligning naturally without force. He responded, not by gripping, but by adjusting, meeting me where I was. The contact was simple. No urgency. No escalation. Just hands, in the dark, acknowledging each other's presence. Something in my chest loosened. Something old. Something carefully guarded. We stayed like that until the storm softened, until the building stopped creaking in protest. When the lights finally brightened slightly, neither of us moved to separate immediately. Eventually we did. Gently, without awkwardness. "Thank you," I said, though the words felt inadequate. He nodded. "Any time." As we continued down the stairs, I realized my hands no longer felt empty. They remembered. After that night, the building felt different. Not altered in any physical way, no walls shifted, no lights changed permanently, but my relationship to it did. Every corridor carried memory now. Every stairwell held the echo of a choice made and not taken back. I moved through the space with an awareness that felt newly embodied, as if something dormant had finally been acknowledged. Arjun and I did not speak about the touch the next day, or the day after. That silence was not avoidant. It was care we both seemed to understand that naming it too soon might reduce it, flatten it into something manageable when it deserved to remain expansive for a while longer. We continued working as we always had. Parallel, precise. But now, when we shared a room, the air felt calibrated differently. Less cautious. More awake. There were new kinds of pauses. When he handed me a clipboard, our fingers came close enough that I could feel warmth without contact. When I leaned over a table to read a margin note, he adjusted the light and stayed where he was. Close, but not encroaching. The restraint had shifted from prevention to intention. One afternoon I caught myself waiting, not for him to arrive, but for the way the room would feel when he did. That realization unsettled me more than the touch had. Want, I was learning, did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it appeared as orientation, a quiet alignment toward another presence. It was during a routine review, nothing urgent, nothing dramatic, that the next decision surfaced. We were in the smaller preservation room, the one with the low ceiling and the single round table. The lights hummed softly, steady. Outside, the day was clear, unremarkable. I was labeling folders when he spoke. "I've been offered a project out of the city," he said. I didn't look up immediately. "When?" "In a few weeks." The word landed with unexpected weight. "How long?" I asked. "6 months, maybe more." I set the pen down carefully. Precision mattered when emotion threatened to blur edges. "Are you going to take it?" "I haven't decided." I looked at him then, really looked. His expression was open, searching, not for permission, but for clarity. "I didn't know how to tell you," he added, "or if I should." "I'm glad you did," I said, and meant it, even as something in me tightened. We sat with that knowledge between us, newly introduced, reshaping the room. "Does it change anything?" he asked. I considered the question honestly. "It makes things clearer." He nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." The rest of the afternoon passed in quiet concentration, but the undercurrent had shifted. Time, which had felt abundant, now carried contour. Decisions were no longer theoretical. As evening approached, I found myself restless. The idea of leaving without acknowledgement felt wrong, like closing a book mid-sentence. "Walk with me?" I asked when we finished. He didn't hesitate. Of course. We took the longer route through the building, the one that looped past rooms rarely used, where the light softened, and the sound of our steps echoed gently. We walked side by side, close enough that our arms occasionally brushed fabric to fabric. The contact was subtle, accidental, but not unrecognized. At the end of the corridor, near the old reading alcove, I stopped. "This is where I make decisions," I said quietly. He waited. "I don't want to rush," I continued, "and I don't want to freeze." He studied me with the same attentiveness he always offered. "Neither do I." I took a breath, let it settle. Then I reached out. Not all the way. I touched his sleeve, just above the wrist. Fabric, not skin, but intentional. He looked down at the contact, then back at me. He did not move. "This," I said, "is me choosing." He nodded. "I see that." I slid my hand lower, to his wrist. Skin this time. Warm. Solid. Present. His breath changed. Not sharply, just noticeably. "Is this okay?" I asked. "Yes." I didn't interlace our fingers. Not yet. I simply held his wrist, grounding myself in the reality of it. The pulse beneath my fingertips was steady, unhurried. "I don't know where this goes," I said. "We don't have to," he replied. "We just have to know where we are." That felt right. I released him slowly, not retreating, completing the gesture. We stood there for a moment longer, the decision made without ceremony. As we walked toward the exit, I realized something profound. The choice itself mattered more than the outcome. I had acted without fear of misinterpretation. I had trusted both my intent and his. That night, alone, I replayed the moment, Not the touch, but the certainty, the way my hand had moved without doubt, the way he had met it without assumption. Whatever came next, distance, time, separation, it would not erase that truth. I had chosen, and in doing so, I had not lost myself. The last night arrived without ceremony. No storm, no warning, just a quiet understanding that some endings announce themselves only by the way time begins to thin around them. Arjun's departure was scheduled for early morning. The building would be closed by then, locked into its overnight stillness. We both knew that if there was to be a moment, the moment, it would have to exist inside the narrow window between duty and goodbye. I stayed late again. This time, I did not pretend it was for work. The building was nearly dark when he found me in the west corridor, the one with the tall windows and the long bench beneath them. The lamps were dimmed low, enough to soften edges, but not erase them. Outside, the city hummed distantly, unconcerned. "You're still here," he said. "So are you." He set his bag down by the wall. No rush, no urgency, just presence. We stood there for a moment, neither of us crossing the space between us yet. The air felt fragile, like glass warmed by hands. "I leave in 6 hours," he said. "Not as a reminder, but as a fact. I know." Silence followed, not empty, but waited. Everything unspoken gathered there, pressing gently. "I don't want to make this bigger than it is," I said finally. "I don't want to make it smaller," he replied. That was the balance we had always held. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere in the building, something settled with a low, patient sound. "Sit with me," I said. We sat on the bench beneath the windows, close but not touching. Our knees faced forward, aligned but separate. I could feel the heat of him through fabric, a quiet presence that did not intrude. "I used to think intimacy was escalation," I said, "that once something began, it had to move forward or fail." He listened. "But with you," I continued, "it feels contained, not limited, just honest." "That's all I ever wanted it to be," he said. I turned toward him then, slowly, fully. The dim light traced his face gently, familiar now. No uncertainty there, only attention. "I don't know when I'll see you again," I said. "We'll figure that out later." I nodded. Later could wait. My hands rested in my lap. Still, empty. For a moment, I thought about leaving them there, about preserving the memory exactly as it was. But preservation is not the same as fear, I reminded myself. Sometimes preservation requires contact. I lifted my right hand, not halfway this time. "All the way!" I placed it between us, palm open, fingers relaxed. An offering, not a request. His breath caught, not sharply, but enough that I noticed. "Is this—" he began. "Yes," I said. He moved then, finally. His hand slid into mine with care, fingers aligning naturally, not forcing interlace, just resting together, skin to skin, warmth exchanged. A simple geometry of connection. The sensation was quiet. No rush of heat, no dramatic pulse. Just weight, reality. The undeniable presence of another person choosing to be there with me. I closed my fingers gently. He responded in kind. That was it. No kiss. No tightening grip. No escalation beyond what the moment asked for. The meaning lived entirely in the restraint. The fact that we both understood how irreversible this was, not because it led somewhere else, but because it had happened at all. I leaned back slightly, still holding his hand. The world felt steadier that way. This changes things, I said softly. Yes, he agreed, but it doesn't take them away. We stayed like that for a long time. Long enough that the building seemed to forget us, returning to its own quiet rhythms. Long enough that the future loosened its hold. Eventually we stood. Neither of us let go immediately. When we did, it was slow, intentional. A closing rather than a severing. At the door, he paused. "Thank you," he said. "For what? For trusting me with that?" I nodded. "Thank you for waiting until I was ready to give it." He smiled then. Not wide, not triumphant. Just real. I watched him leave without following. That was part of the choice too. Later, alone, I sat in the same place by the window. I held my own hand for a moment, not to replicate what had happened, but to acknowledge it. The woman who never touched anyone had made a decision in the dark and carried it into the light, and that was enough.